Então, pessoal, hoje a gente está dando início ao quarto treinamento do estudo em que a gente tem parceria da PBSF com Stanford. A gente está muito feliz hoje com a presença da Cat Randall, que é enfermeira e especialista em UTI neonatal, em neuroproteção, neuromonitorização. Ela tem uma empresa que trabalha com isso, então realmente vocês estão aqui com uma pessoa que de fato entende e que foi quem ensinou todo mundo aqui, né? Quem ensinou o pessoal de Stanford. Então a gente está realmente muito bem, né? Com uma representação muito boa do EEG. E o Dr. Gabriel Variani, que vai apresentar para a gente alguns casos clínicos e para mostrar para vocês de fato o uso do EEG na prática. Eu agradeço a presença de todos, eu gostaria de dar alguns recados, eu vou passar novamente a lista de presença. Hoje a gente não tem questionário, então é só lista de presença, a gente só precisa que vocês coloquem profissão e o hospital que trabalha, nada mais, isso é anônimo, a gente só precisa quantificar quantos profissionais de cada hospital de fato estão sendo treinados, tá? Eu vou divulgar isso, vocês têm acesso às outras listas, né, dos outros treinamentos, então eu vou pedir para quem for treinado, para quando vocês divulgarem para as equipes, para que as pessoas preencham, né, os últimos 2 treinamentos, a gente teve no primeiro treinamento a gente teve 66 respostas, e nos últimos 2 a gente teve 16 e 22, né, e eu imagino que muito mais pessoas assistiram às aulas, mesmo gravada e ao vivo, então eu gostaria de pedir para vocês a divulgação. A gente tem recebido mensagem também de profissionais de alguns centros que não receberam a divulgação da aula gravada ou que nem sabiam, né, pessoas da enfermagem, por exemplo, que nem sabiam do estudo ou dos treinamentos. Então, eu queria reforçar a importância do engajamento de vocês nesse estudo, que somente se a gente conseguir treinar a equipe é que a gente vai ser capaz aí de atingir o objetivo de homogeneizar a assistência para os bebês asfixiados. Então, eu peço aí, meio que um apelo aí do estudo mesmo, para que haja engajamento de toda a equipe médica, equipe de enfermagem, equipe multi, assim, como um todo, tá bom? E, então, é isso, vamos começar. So, Katy, thank you so much for joining us. It's an honor to have you here again to speak about EEG, and we are just happy and excited to hear you again. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. It's always an honor to be here with you and to be a part of your webinar series and education programs. And anytime you ask, I always want to say yes. So it's really my pleasure to be here and to be a part of this series. So I'll go ahead and get started. I'm excited that we have this new translation beneath these slides. So this is new for me, so I'm trying to not be too distracted by this exciting technology that we're seeing here. So let's just start with the basics, which is, as many of you know, when we talk about providing a new kind of care in the NICU, we're talking about this 4 pillars of a neuro-nurturing NICU care, and that this has these 4 pillars. And I'm sure you have heard about these from Gabriel and from Daniela and others on the team. And they really consist of these things like neuroassessment, neuromonitoring, neuroprotection, things like cooling, and then neurodevelopment, the things we can do to improve babies' outcomes. But for today, we're going to focus on the second pillar, which is the monitoring. And bedside brain monitoring is something that is not really new. For me, I feel like I've been talking about it for many, many years, but I think it's something that is still not 100% standard of care. And so when we think about bedside brain monitoring, it really is a complementary tool that can be used alongside many other neuroassessment tools or diagnostic procedures that we might do. So definitely things like imaging can give us amazing information. Things like our neurological exam also give us information, but we use brain monitoring to enhance or to supplement these other points in time. And what I love about bedside brain monitoring is that it is unit-based, meaning that it's for us in the NICU. It is continuous. If you have enough monitors, it can be continuous, or sometimes we have to move the monitor from bed space to bed space. And it's real time. And so when we move to the cases in a little bit, Gabriel is going to show you how in real time we can gain so much information from using these tools. So when we think of bedside brain monitoring, there are really two categories. There is brain function, which is where we think about EEG or amplitude integrated EEG or cerebral function monitors. And then there is brain perfusion. And so there is so much power in using these tools together. And so for today only, we're going to focus on AEEG or amplitude integrated EEG or the functional monitors. So let's talk about some maybe truths and lies that we have maybe heard about amplitude integrated EEG or AEEG. So number one is, and this is maybe a question you can ask in your mind, do I think AEEG is easy to read? Can I use AEEG with term babies and preterm babies? Can it help me to identify a unilateral injury or maybe the extent of injury? And can it help me to identify seizures? So depending on maybe the literature you've read or the places you've worked, you maybe believe or don't believe that some of these things are truths or lies. Let's see, there's a chat. So let me just check and make sure there's nothing. Okay, it's just an announcement. Okay, so let's move forward with AEEG. So when we say AEEG, we are using a little baby A, not a capital A, but a baby A. And we say this stands for amplitude integrated EEG. So I'm going to break down what this means, because once you understand how the AEEG is created, it makes things so much more simple to do. So amplitude, AEEG only is worried about the amplitude of the brain waves. So it looks at the maximum and minimums of the brain waves, looks at the voltage, max min, and it is always looking to measure these waveforms. There are many other trends that we could look at, but for AEEG, we're looking at amplitude. It takes all of this amplitude, this voltage pattern, and it combines it, and it makes a trend. That's where the word integration comes in. So amplitude, how big are my waves? How strong is my brain? Trending that, and what is being trended, as you know, is brain waves and brain electrical activity. These waveforms that are created on EEG are dependent on where we put the electrodes. If we put them on the side of the head, or we put them across the head, or we put them close together or far apart, that's what makes a difference in the waveforms that we see. We also know that EEG only is reflecting that surface cortical activity. So there are oftentimes activity that is happening away from the electrodes or very deep in the brain that is not picked up on EEG. And this is true for all ages, not just newborns. So let's spend just a few minutes talking about how does this EEG pattern, the squiggly EEG, turn into AEEG on the screen that you see. It's a little bit like a transformer. It goes from one to the next. So we start out with EEG, and it's positive, negative, positive, negative, positive, negative. And the first step that happens is rectification. And basically what this means is that all the negative values get flipped up and make positive. So a little bit like this in the illustration. The next thing that happens after rectification is peak detection. So it's looking for these peaks and valleys of voltage. What are my highs? What are my lows? And so we call this peak detection. And then every 15 seconds, that max voltage and min voltage, those absolute values, are plotted out on a semi-logarithmic scale. So we have this compression, that integration that happens. So again, every 15 seconds, it's one stroke that represents that max and min. And I want to just take a minute and just talk about this semi-logarithmic scale. So what this means is that the paper scale that you see on your screen is divided into two parts. When we are looking at the lower portion of our charts or our graphs, we're seeing that there is this linear relationship in the scale. So the distance between 0 and 1 microvolts is the same as 1 to 2 microvolts, as 3 to 4, 4 to 5, 5 to 6. It's linear. We're all familiar with that. It's very easy for us to estimate where 4 is and 9 is, right? We can easily look on the scale and I can approximate where is 9, right? I can approximate where is 3. But above the 10 line, the pattern or the scale turns logarithmic. And as you know, that just creates a doubling in space. And so it becomes a little harder to estimate and guesstimate where exactly that voltage is. And so many monitors will put in a 25 line or a 50 microvolt line to make it a little bit easier. But really, once we get over 10 microvolts on this scale, we usually just say it's greater than 10, greater than 25, greater than 50, greater than 75, because we can't quite be as specific as we are in that 0 to 10 range. But lucky for us, babies like to spend a lot of time in low voltage. So it makes the pattern very interesting to look at. So again, every 15 seconds, we have this line that is created on the monitor that represents the maximum and minimum voltage, max min, max min, max min, max min, and it stacks up over time, very slowly, one line every 15 seconds. And so what we end up with is a pattern that looks like this sometimes, and it takes time to build this. This is about a 3.5-hour pattern built one 15-second line at a time. So it takes time to create these patterns. This is why AEEG is a long-term monitor, something we leave on for hours, we leave it on for days, because it takes time to build this pattern up. The speed at which this is written is 6 centimeters an hour, or about 1 centimeter every 10 minutes. So again, 15 seconds, 15 seconds, 15 seconds built up together, 1 centimeter, 10 minutes, that's about 40 strokes, right? Like building it up, building it up, building it up, very slow speed. But it's very consistent across all the different monitors on the market. So let's look at what maybe a screen that you've seen before looks like. They typically are divided into two parts. They usually have the AEEG trend at the top, or maybe for your monitor, it's at the bottom. It doesn't really matter. They're divided into channels, maybe a right channel, a left channel, a cross channel. So they'll be labeled based on your monitor. And then usually there is also a comparative raw EEG pattern that is going along at the same time. So you'll have the raw EEG going max, going kind of all of it, maximum, minimums, all happening. And then you'll have the compression that you'll see in real time above it. So you can kind of see what's been happening for the last few hours. So my best news of the day is that there are only 5 patterns that we ever have to learn with AEEG. And this is the this is listed here. So we have one pattern that is normal for the term baby. We have one pattern that is normal for our preterm babies. And then there are 3 patterns, 3 patterns that are kind of abnormal or pathological for all ages. So if we know what we can expect before we walk up to the baby's bedside, then when we don't see what we expect, we can say, something is going on. I wonder what's happening with this baby's brain. So I think it's very important in the beginning to focus on the normals. And then when you see something that is not what you expect, then you can go and get some extra explanation and look in a little deeper. So here are, I don't know why there's only 4 here, but 4 of the 5 patterns. I'll be sure to mention the 5th one in a second. The first is continuous normal voltage. The second pattern is discontinuous normal voltage. Then we have burst suppression, low voltage, and then flat should be at the bottom, which I'm not sure why it's covered up. And here's what the different patterns look like visually, and we're going to break them down, each of them one by one. The continuous normal voltage is for our term baby. The discontinuous is for our preterm baby, or sometimes for a sick term baby. Then we have burst suppression. This is for very sick term babies, and extremely preterm babies sometimes have a pattern that looks like burst suppression. Then we have low voltage. This is never normal. It doesn't matter if you're 22 years old or 22 weeks old. This is never normal. And then this flat tracing, which is there at the bottom, is for very, 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 very sick term and preterm babies. And these are, nothing we ever want to see. It just means the brain is very inactive. So these are the 5 basic patterns and the times in which we tend to see them. So you can make a screenshot of this and use it as reference. You can download it from my website and other places too, but this is nice and easy. If you're on your phone, you can just make a little screenshot. So let's talk about these different patterns in a little more detail so you'll be able to identify them in just, seconds when you're at the bedside. So when we talk about the pattern, and I hope you can see my my pointer, remember we are always looking at the scale of AEEG, that semi-logarithmic scale, 0, 5, 10. This is about 50, and then 100. There's the 100. So 0, 5, 10, 50, 100. When we're talking about a term baby, a normal pattern, we want the top edge of the AEEG to be greater than 10, and we want the lower edge to be greater than 5. And that's it, greater than 10, greater than 5. For preterm babies, we still want the upper margin, so 0, 5, 10, 50, 100. The upper margin should still be greater than 10, but because their brains are immature, we allow the lower margin to drift below 5. And that's the only difference between continuous normal voltage and discontinuous normal voltage, is the lower margin is less than 5. So when we think about preterm babies, it's normal that they have this discontinuous pattern where the lower margin is less than 5 in all behavioral states. Whether they're asleep, whether you're interacting with them, they're just discontinuous. And so they don't, which means that they just don't keep their brain activity constantly active. They have pauses, just like how they have apnea of prematurity. It's almost like brain apnea of prematurity, where they have these pauses or lower activity, then followed by picked up activity or increased activity. They call this tracé discontinue. This is the French term for this. And you can see that as babies get older in age, here's a baby at 31 weeks and here's a baby at 33 weeks. As the baby gets older, the amount of time that they have continuous activity increases. And as that increases, the lower margin of the AEEG also increases. So just like the babies are beginning to have more continuous respirations, they're having more continuous brain activity, and this brings this lower margin of the AEEG up away from the bottom baseline. So the more activity on EEG, the more that the AEEG band will lift up and the more that it becomes dense. And so we'll see some examples of that as well. By about 34 to 36 weeks gestation, discontinuous patterns are only seen when the baby is in a quiet sleep state. And so you'll see that the lower margin of this AEEG, here's our 0, right? 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So right here at the 5, and the only time it dips down is in this beautiful sinusoidal pattern, which we'll talk about in a little bit, which is known as sleep, or during kind of a quiet sleep, not REM sleep, but a quiet sleep. So we see this shifting down below 5 and coming back up towards 5 and shifting down below 5. So here, 33 weeks, 35 weeks, 37 weeks, we see that the discontinuous pattern becomes less frequent and only associated with sleep. This is called trace alternan. It's alternating between continuous and discontinuous. And I'll show another example in a little bit. The other time where we may have a term baby who has a discontinuous pattern might be after giving a medication. And so this is a beautiful example of, you can see here, here's the AEG pattern, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 25, 50, 100. So we can see this semi-logarithmic pattern. This AEEG, the lower margin was greater than 5, the upper margin was greater than 10, and then the baby got phenobarbital right here. And you see the lower margin for this next 30, 45 minutes, it goes down. I think I maybe forgot to mention for you earlier, I talked a little bit about stacking them up 1 centimeter every 10 minutes. But you can see that most monitors, and even this is old paper, has these marks here, which are a way that you can find the 10 minutes. So when we see this depression in the lower margin, and I was saying it's 40 minutes, this is how I know, because I know this is 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 40 minutes, almost 50 minutes, and here would be about an hour, 60 minutes. So each of these increments are 10 minutes. So that's always helpful to be able to look as you go across the screen. But you can see this effect very beautifully of phenobarbital. And this is a pretty healthy brain because the effect of that only lasted about that hour and then it came back up. So we've talked about the normals, continuous normal voltage and discontinuous normal voltage, where we would expect those in our term and preterm. But there are some of these other patterns, burst suppression, low voltage, and flat or inactive trace, that don't really meet our criteria for normal. So the first one is burst suppression. And so burst suppression is, again, a mixture of very high voltage and very low voltage. It's a little bit like discontinuous, except it has a very characteristic pattern. And the upper edge is always greater than 25. So when we talked about normal voltage, we always wanted that upper edge to be above 10. Well, for burst suppression, we want the upper margin typically is going to be hitting over 25. The lower margin is very low, and it also has a very characteristic flatness. Very flat along the bottom. Some people call this a comb, like if you turned a comb to comb your hair, if you turn the comb upside down and it has the teeth of the comb, some people will describe it this way, and I think it's a very accurate way to think of it. So upper margin burst is greater than 25, and the lower margin is usually very low, usually about 1 to 3 microvolts. For continuous low voltage, now we're talking about a pattern that doesn't meet either of our criteria. The upper margin doesn't even hit 10, and the lower margin is still very low, under 5. And so this one is very easy to see because it's continuous, so meaning there's activity all the time. So that's continuous, but it's all low voltage, meaning that the upper margin doesn't ever really get above 5. So continuous, yes. So it's dense. It's not broken, like the burst suppression is kind of broken comb. This is a full comb, very thick, but it's all low. So the upper margin is low. Then we get to inactive or flat, and that's when everything is just very suppressed and everything is less than 5. This is very abnormal, and we hope to see it very rarely. Okay, so if you are in your chat, I want you to be close to your keyboard, and I want you to tell me for the continuous normal voltage, I want you to type in what is the upper and the lower. So for upper margin should be greater than what, and the lower margin should be greater than what, or you can unmute, it's either way. So type it in, I want to see for normal voltage, what are we looking for the term baby? Upper margin is greater than, type it in. I'm waiting. Normal voltage. Greater than
10.
10. Thank you. And the lower margin should be greater than
5.
5. Exactly. Exactly. Perfect. And then for discontinuous, the upper margin should be greater than
10.
10, but the lower margin is less than 5. Exactly. How about burst suppression? Burst suppression is greater than, this is the tricky one, greater than
5.
25, exactly. And the lower margin is going to be less than
3.
Usually less than 3. And then we have our low voltage. For low voltage, the upper margin is never greater than
10.
10, exactly. And then the lower margin is still less than
5.
5, exactly. And then for the flat or the inactive, less than 5, everything less than 5. It's all very low and very fast. Perfect. You guys got it. Okay, so this is another one that you can take a screen picture of, or if Gabriel wants to send the slides or whatever, it's fine too. But this is really helpful when you're standing at the bedside and you're saying, okay, this is what I'm seeing. And this is the first part of interpretation. So we're going to spend the next few minutes going into other features of AEEG, but this is the place to begin. You want to be able to walk up to the bedside, say, term baby, preterm baby. Okay, if it's a term baby, I'm looking for this. If it's preterm baby, I'm looking for this. Okay, I know what I'm looking for. And then you want to look at the band for the last 3 hours and you just say, upper margin, where are you? Lower margin, where are you? Is that what I expect? And that's where you begin. That is the first step to interpretation. Once you master that, then there are 5 more things that you can look at. And so we're going to quickly go through these, but this is that next step of what you're looking for. So we've already talked about neonatal sleep, and we know that sleep-wake patterns are very important because they show us that the brain is maturing and that the brain is organizing. We also know babies who have hypoxia oftentimes have disrupted sleep-wake cycles, so it can give us a little clue. And it just tells us, especially after cooling, if we see that there is sleep-wake patterns, we see functional recovery of the brain. And this has been linked to long-term outcomes. So we want to be looking for sleep-wake patterns for our babies after cooling or during those last 24 hours of cooling. It's very highly predictive. So what does sleep look like on AEEG? So first, I want to show you this little segment here. This is about 20 minutes of AEG. Remember, there's the lines here. It's about 20 minutes. And we see what kind of pattern here. Here's our 0, here's our 5, here's our 10. Is the upper margin greater than 10? Yes. And the lower margin greater than 5? Yes. So what kind of pattern is this?
Continue.
Continuous, exactly. And then we go to the next section. We're going to look at the next 10, 20, 25 minutes. And we see the upper margin is still greater than 10, but now our lower margin drifts below 5. So this is discontinuous. Then we see that for the next 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 minutes, we have upper margin greater than 10, lower margin greater than 5. Back to that continuous pattern. So we're like, okay, it's now cycling between these patterns. It was continuous, now discontinuous, continuous. Now we go, we see, oh, another 30 minutes. We see, oh, this baby is going back into discontinuous and now going back into continuous and discontinuous and continuous. And what I like to look for is when the baby is sleeping to see the drift down and drift up about 1 time every hour. Some people will be like maybe more like every 20 to 30 minutes, but I'm looking for at least 1 dip down and 1 dip up every hour. And this to me is a very nice sign of organized sleep-wake pattern. So this is what you're looking for as the next step. After you've said, what's the background? Then you say, do I see this cycling? Yes or no. This is that trace alternans, alternating patterns. If I don't see it, Then I start to say, is the baby younger? Is the baby having hypoxia? Maybe he's a cardiac baby. Is the baby still not recovering from cooling? What else is going on? What other things can I do? Next thing I want to look at is symmetry. So when because this is important to look for brain injury, can look for a localized problem, might be a seizure that's localized to one side, it might be a suppression that's on one side. And it can also tell me if there's an equipment malfunction, very important as well, because we want to keep our sensors in good place. So normally when we put on a full EEG, we have all these stickers all over the baby's head, but with AEEG, we're localizing to just a few small areas of the baby's brain. And so we don't have to put on all of the same electrodes that we would if we did a full EEG. We're just looking at a few small areas. And we really look at the area known as the central and parietal zones of the baby's brain, central and parietal. And on this diagram, you'll see it's labeled C3, P3, C4, P4. These are the electrode positions so that we have consistency every single time we put the electrodes on. So we put them here over the central and parietal area of the baby's brain. And this is an area that's very high yield for seizures, and it's a very high yield for hypoxia or for suppressed injury from a watershed zone. So this is the place that we put the electrodes, and we end up with many different channels. So a channel is just one pair of electrodes. So if I put 2 electrodes here on the left side of my head, this is one channel. If I put 2 electrodes on this side of my head, that's one channel. So now I have 2 channels. If I actually look at the information between the 2 electrodes across my head or cross cerebral or biparietal, now I have another channel. So I can configure all these different channels from just a few electrodes. The most common are left, right, and cross. Or biparietal, usually using the parietal ones. So we have 3 channels of AEEG, and then that will correspond with 3 channels of EEG. So depending on what your monitor looks like, it might have 3, you might just have left and right. It just depends on what monitor you have. This is another one, left and right. And sometimes we see that the pattern is not always symmetrical between the 2 sides of the brain. So you can see here on the left, it's very flat, and on the right, it looks pretty normal. And we think, what could be the causes of this? And there are really 3 main causes. The first is that there's actually an injury to the brain causing suppressed brain activity on one side. The other is sometimes the baby's head is very edematous or has lots of fluid, and it's just not letting the electrodes get through. And the other reason is sometimes the electrodes are too close together or they're touching and we have an error that's happening. So I'll show you an example. So here's an example of a baby who had a unilateral stroke. And so you can see here on the DWI where it's all lit up here for you. And you can see that this injury is resulting in low voltage, which results in a low AEEG. That's essentially one reason you might see an asymmetrical pattern. The other is a pattern like this, where it's kind of low on one side and normal on the other, and then you go assess the baby and you see that the electrodes are touching. And once you fix the electrodes, the pattern goes back to being symmetrical. So this is the second thing you want to assess, is you want to look at first the pattern, then the sleeping, and then the symmetry to see if it's matching back and forth. The kind of next thing you want to look for are seizures. And seizures have this very characteristic pattern where they rise up and go down. And I call these suspicious for seizures. They're a gradual increase and decrease of the upper and lower margin. It's like an archway in the AEEG band. So we can see these in various different ways. Here you see it's unilateral seizure on this right side here, a single seizure kind of superimposed over a very nice, kind of consistent pattern, but this one big seizure that lasts for about 10 minutes. We can also have repetitive seizures. Oops, that's just showing kind of the time. We can have repetitive seizures. This is seizure, 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 seizure. So baby in status epilepticus. So almost for this 2.5 hour time, the baby is doing nothing but seizing, seizing, seizing. Has a very common pattern. They call it a sawtooth pattern. We see that there. And one of the things we have to look for is whether or not those uprisings in the AEG are actually caused by real seizure activity. And this is where it gets tricky. And that's why I say, it's a little bit of a progression to, you start with the patterns, you start with sleep, you start with symmetry, then you go to seizures, because it becomes, with time, it gets easier to begin to see these. But an easy definition of seizure activity is that the actual EEG will be spiky, it will be rhythmic, it will last for more than 10 seconds, it will fill up that bottom part of your screen, and it has a crescendo, decrescendo, or easier way to say that is a beginning, a middle, and an end. So it doesn't just start and stop, it has a ramping up, getting more frequent, and then coming down. And I think Gabriel has some nice examples of this as well. There are many reasons that you can be confused on AEEG, and it's mostly from artifacts that come in our environment. Sometimes it's heart rate artifact, like ECG. You can see on the raw EEG here, you see these little notches. These are ECG patterns. You can take a screenshot and count it out and match it to your ECG pattern. Sometimes we have muscle artifacts. Sometimes we get too close to the facial muscles, or maybe too close to the muscles right over the ears. We put our electrodes on too low and the baby is crying or sucking, and we get this muscle artifact. We can also have high frequency artifacts, like from a high frequency ventilator, and also movement. If the baby is moving around or we're doing cares, there can be artifacts that falsely elevate our AEEG. So we have to go in and look. If we have video, even better, and look through each and every one of these. So the last little bit I want to talk about is stability. And this is important because we usually monitor with AEEG for many hours or many days. So we have the ability to see changes in the pattern over time. So we care about stability because we like to see the pattern change over time and become more mature or more normal. We can see, especially in babies who have been cooled, that if the pattern becomes more normal over time, that's a good indicator of improvement. And we can also see effects of medication. So we can compare what we saw before to what we see now. So I want to just show you really quickly here a baby who is 29 weeks and has a very nice pattern. You see 0, 5, 10, 25. So upper margin greater than 25. Lower margin is less than 5, but for a 29 weeker, this is really great. In the right side, we see upper margin is greater than 10, lower margin is greater than 5. This is a very nice pattern. It doesn't have sleep-wake cycles, but it's a very young baby, so we don't expect them. And we see that it's symmetrical, which is great. And we don't see any uprising, so we don't have any suspicion for seizures at this point. We look here at the EEG, we don't see any problems, any artifacts. So we like this pattern a lot. Then we walk away and we come back to the bedside a couple hours later and we see this. And you're like, ooh, what happened, right? What are some of the things that you think might have happened to this baby? I'm gonna see if you put it in the chat for me. What are some things that could cause this pattern to go from so beautiful to so horrible?
Sedation.
Sedation, yeah. What other things could happen? Plugged ET tube.
Hemodynamic instability.
Yes. Instability, right. The baby's crashing, right, in shock.
Yeah. IVH.
IVH.
Severe one.
Yeah, severe IVH. Could also be maybe a plug in the ET tube.
Definitely.
Could be,
hypoxia.
yeah.
Hypoxia, yeah.
Hypoxia. It could be that the sensors got messed up and now the sensors are touching, right? So it could be all of these things. In this case, this baby received a little bit of sedation, and it was a normal dose of Ativan or lorazepam, and the baby had an immediate just change. I mean, this is crazy to be able to see at the bedside this beautiful pattern go to nothing. And this pattern for this baby, it stayed like this for about 24 hours. It was awful. And we didn't give more. So that's just one way. This is why looking at the pattern before and after, we can see these changes. This is a nice old case from the early 2000s, a baby who was in a cooling study. They came in day of life 1 with this very flat tracing. On day of life 3, it's better, but still horrible. And then on day 10, this baby had a nice recovery and a beginning to see of a sleep-wake cycle. This baby had a normal outcome as well. This baby was cooled. So seeing changes over time, over several days, over minutes, and even, of course, if for premature babies, over many weeks, we may see it. So I'm going to wrap up because I know Gabriel has some cases. And so I just wanted to say, who should you monitor? Because people ask all the time. I would say monitor everybody because it gives you good practice. But if you are looking for those who are the most at risk, you could always pick those babies who had a hypoxic event. Babies who you suspect of having seizures are always a good group. And then any baby, if he's paralyzed, when he couldn't show you a seizure, would be a good baby to monitor. And then there's always these very not obvious babies who are having withdrawals, babies who have sepsis, meningitis, even hyperbiliary, babies who are just, unwell in general. You can oftentimes see babies who are on medications that can be valuable to watch their brain monitoring. And how long should you monitor them? People ask this all the time. If it's a baby who's cooling, we would say start as soon as possible and all the way through rewarming, and all the way till you have to send them to MRI, keep the brain going, the monitoring. Seizures, if it's, most people would say to keep monitoring until you go about 12 or 24 hours without the last seizure. And then for preemies, a lot of places in Europe do a little spot check every few, maybe for a couple hours, every few weeks to kind of look at that change over time. And especially for preemies who have a high grade IVH, they're very much at risk for subclinical seizures. And this would be another group to consider monitoring. At least, again, you're looking for seizures, so you kind of go up here and you're looking for 12 to 24 hours of seizure-free activity. And then for everyone else, if you choose to start monitoring, is to just reassess every 12 hours or so and see, is this giving us any valuable information? And if not, then that might be a conversation to then discontinue that. So in summary, AEEG is not new. It can be easy to read with practice. It can be used in our term babies and our preterm babies. We can use it for over many hours and many days. It can help us to look for large injuries over the whole brain or small unilateral focal injuries, help us see the recovery of the brain, and look for those subclinical seizures. It has limits. It's not the same as doing a full EEG, but it is always better than nothing, and it gives us huge, powerful information. So on my website, Synapse Care, there are many free courses, many free tools that you can download. And again, I'll just say to Gabriel, thank you for always inviting me to be a part. And sorry for taking a little bit too much time. Actually, 40 minutes, but almost perfect.
Yeah, definitely. So Kathy, thank you so much. Thank you so much. I always like to remember that you were the one that actually teached me AEG for the very first time back there in Germany.
Yes.
Right? I don't know how many years ago.
A long time.
And definitely every single time I see your talk, I learned something new. So thank you so much again. I can say you are the best. So I'll have a hard time now because I will need to present after you.
Oh, well, thank you for those kind words, but I always learn something from you too. So
now on, I will speak in Portuguese, but the subtitles.
It's okay, I'm going to practice.
Ok. Let's see how it goes. Bom, pessoal, então, nesse momento, a gente vai dar continuidade. Como eu gosto de falar, é sempre uma tarefa muito difícil falar depois da Cat, porque ela realmente é uma das melhores palestrantes que eu conheço. Mas a gente vai focar essa segunda parte da nossa apresentação em falar um pouquinho sobre o EEG especificamente na hipotermia terapêutica ou em bebês com asfixia perinatal. Então, a gente vai focar bastante com estudos de casos. A ideia é trazer alguns casos para que fique mais palpável nessa população específica do nosso estudo, como é que o AEG ele vai se comportar. Então, aqui a gente tem, né, só um segundinho. Então, aqui a gente tem, né, uma pergunta: por que o monitoramento cerebral seria útil nesses bebês com asfixia? E vamos olhar de forma muito rápida, né, sobre tudo isso. E quando a gente fala sobre, primeiro, asfixia perinatal, o que a gente sabe de asfixia? A gente sabe que é uma doença que tem alta incidência, alta mortalidade, alto risco de lesão cerebral e altíssimo risco de crises epiléticas. A gente sabe, né? E toda vez que a gente coloca tudo isso junto, pode ser, inclusive, um pouco assustador. Quando a gente fala da parte do monitoramento cerebral, né, aqui a gente traz algumas formas de fazer monitoramento cerebral contínuo, como o AEG, como o NIRS. Hoje a gente vai, né, a gente está focando nossa apresentação naturalmente no AEG. E como a Cat acabou de trazer para a gente, né, que tipo de informação, então, nos bebês com asfixia, o AEG pode trazer? As mesmas informações que ela trouxe. Então, eu consigo ver atividade elétrica de base, né, que a gente falou muito sobre os 5 diferentes padrões: contínuo, descontínuo, surto-supressão, contínuo de baixa voltagem ou isoelétrico, né? Então, a gente consegue ver a função cerebral, atividade elétrica de base. A gente consegue ver ciclo, sono e vigília, como a Cat também trouxe, né? A questão das crises epiléticas e como a gente monitoriza, né, mais que, né, quando a gente monitoriza mais do que um canal isoladamente, a gente ainda consegue ver simetria, né, se a gente estiver utilizando eletrodos nos 2 hemisférios, e estabilidade ao longo das horas. A gente consegue enxergar como é o padrão do AEG, né, durante as horas de monitoramento. Mas isso é uma breve introdução, porque agora a gente vai combinar como é que eu tenho a intersecção, onde que o AEG, né, pode ser utilizado nos bebês com asfixia. E a primeira pergunta é: poxa, né, eu tenho ali um bebê sob monitoramento cerebral, como a asfixia ou a encefalopatia hipoxisquêmica pode impactar nos achados do AEG? E vamos pensar juntos, né? Lembra, o AEG é um monitor de função cerebral que vê atividade de base, vê o ciclo sono-vigília, consegue ver crises convulsivas. Como é que o AEG pode, né? O que o insulto hipoxisquêmico pode levar? E basicamente, primeiro, né, quando a gente tem, de novo, é um monitor de função cerebral, é muito mais do que crise convulsiva, sim ou não. O cérebro saudável tem ondas saudáveis, o cérebro doente tem ondas doentes. E a primeira coisa que pode acontecer é porque a gente pode ter uma depressão da atividade elétrica de base, ou seja, o padrão ficar patológico. Aqui é um exemplo que a gente vai trazer, então, o que acontece? Eu tenho um insulto hipoxisquêmico, né? Como resultado do insulto hipoxisquêmico, eu consigo enxergar uma depressão na atividade de base, e ao longo das horas eu tenho uma tendência a ter uma recuperação gradual dessa atividade de base. Vai ficar um pouco mais palpável com o nosso primeiro caso. Aqui a gente tem um bebezinho a termo que nasceu de 38 semanas, peso de 3,80, teve um prolapso de cordão, um evento perinatal agudo, um Apgar super baixo, 0, 1, 2, 5, né? Gasometria arterial com pH menor que 7, encefalopatia grave, iniciada hipotermia terapêutica. Pois bem, vamos ver como é que é o monitoramento dessa criança. A gente vai ver ao longo da evolução das horas de vida desse bebê. E aqui a gente vê o padrão com 6 horas de vida. E com 6 horas de vida, vocês conseguem ver que claramente esse padrão está bastante deprimido, é uma linha reta, né? Aquele, né, toda atividade está abaixo de 5 microvolts, como a Cat trouxe muito bem para a gente. Esse é o padrão isoelétrico, ou flat trace, né, que a gente está enxergando para essa criança. É um padrão muito grave, essa criança deve ter tido um insulto muito importante, mas ao longo das horas eu preciso ver como é a recuperação. com 24 horas de vida, essa criança teve alguma recuperação. Vocês conseguem ver que ainda é uma atividade muito deprimida, né? Mas aqui ela já tem uma tendência a ter alguma recuperação. Momentos aqui que a amplitude máxima está entre 5 e 10, né? Talvez a gente já possa chamar de contínuo de baixa voltagem, né? Em alguns momentos durante esse traçado. Então, eu tive uma recuperação parcial, mas ainda patológico. Com 48 horas de vida, olha como a gente enxerga, como aos poucos, paulatinamente, a gente consegue enxergar uma recuperação dessa atividade de base, até aqui em alguns momentos atingindo o padrão descontínuo, o padrão até mesmo contínuo em alguns momentos, mas eu tenho uma recuperação. E aqui ficou super fácil de ver, já com 80 horas de vida, né? Então, aqui a gente tem amplitude mínima, como a Cat trouxe para a gente, maior que 5 e amplitude máxima maior do que 10 microvolts, é o padrão contínuo. Então, o que o AEG consegue ver nos bebês com asfixia? A gente consegue ver essa depressão da atividade base, mas também a recuperação desse traçado. Muitos autores chamam isso como tempo para o traçado normal, né, que é o número de horas necessárias para recuperar essa atividade. Então, sim, né, quando a gente tem um insulto hipóxico-isquêmico, pode levar, e frequentemente leva, a uma depressão da atividade elétrica. Além disso, ele também pode perder o ciclo sono e vigília, né, que geralmente é um sinal de maturidade, de saúde cerebral. Né? A gente relembra que ciclo sono e vigília é quando a gente consegue ver esses momentos onde de forma periódica as amplitudes mínimas e máximas se afastam e aqui se aproximam, se afastam, se aproximam, né, de forma periódica, onde eu tenho momentos de sono profundo e momentos de sono superficial. Isso é sempre um sinal de bom prognóstico nessa população. Mas muito comumente o que a gente encontra é isso, né, nos bebês com asfixia, muito comumente eles não têm, mesmo quando recuperam a atividade de base normal, muitos deles não recuperam o ciclo sono e vigília, a gente vê isso de forma muito comum. E por fim, crises convulsivas, como a Cat trouxe para a gente, né? Crises convulsivas, a gente vai enxergar no AEG aquele formato de cone, né? Aquele aumento súbito da amplitude mínima e máxima, e no EG bruto o traçado estereotipado, ponto, espícula, onda, perdurando mais que 10 segundos. Isso é crise epilética, a gente precisa sempre enxergar. Mas no fim do dia, Gabriel, mais casos clínicos, como é que essa informação pode ser útil? Então, agora eu tenho meu bebê na minha unidade e eu faço AEG. Eu já entendi o que pode acontecer com a AEG, né? Para que pode servir, né? E o AEG em bebês com encefalopatia pós-isquêmica também tem uma série de valias. A primeira delas a gente vai falar no prognóstico, detecção de crises epiléticas e auxílio na avaliação do tratamento ou não com hipotermia terapêutica também pode ser um fator aí que nos auxilia de alguma forma. Só para falar um pouquinho em estudos relacionados ao prognóstico, ainda naquele conceito de tempo para o traçado normal, ou recuperação da atividade normal, a gente só traz uma revisão sistemática para ver o poder disso, que avaliou 17 estudos, onde nos pacientes tratados com hipotermia terapêutica, o valor preditivo máximo foi alcançado com 72 horas de vida, onde, se esse bebê ainda tivesse um traçado patológico com 72 horas de vida e fizesse hipotermia terapêutica, ele teria cerca, né, de 95,7% de chance de apresentar uma lesão importante. Isso daqui tem um valor prognóstico, né? Mesmo em hipotermia, que não é mais com 6 horas de vida, o valor prognóstico aqui é um valor prognóstico muito forte, entre 48 e 72 horas. E vamos ver isso em casos clínicos. Aqui eu tenho um bebezinho a termo, com idade gestacional de 38 semanas, peso de nascimento 3.800, Apgar 1, 3, 5 e 7, a gasometria arterial com base excess menor que menos 16, e esse bebê tinha encefalopatia moderada, né? Então, esse bebê preenchia critérios para hipotermia terapêutica, a gente já teve esse treinamento, né? E aqui a gente vai ver a evolução do AEG da atividade base. E quando a gente enxerga nesse traçado, né? Que traçado que é esse? Amplitude máxima, né, acima de 5, mas menor que 10, amplitude mínima menor que 5. Que traçado que é esse? Bom, basicamente, podem falar no chat ou abrir o microfone semelhantemente anterior, mas basicamente é um traçado contínuo de baixa voltagem. Enfim, é um traçado patológico, com 6 horas, com 24 horas de vida. Que traçado que é esse agora? né? Eu tive uma mudança, eu tive uma evolução, sim ou não? Eu tive uma evolução muito importante. E agora eu tenho traçado?
Contínuo.
Boa, exatamente, né? Eu tenho traçado contínuo, amplitude mínima maior que 5 e máxima maior que 10. E o outcome, né? Como é que foi o desfecho precoce dessa criança? Ele saiu com uma ressonância de crânio normal, com alta com 12 dias de vida. Ele teve uma recuperação daquela atividade de base de forma muito precoce. Mas olha esse segundo caso. Um bebezinho a termo, de 39 semanas, entubado na sala de parto, uma gasometria com pH também menor que 7, encefalopatia grave, possivelmente a gente vai ter um insulto mais importante. Um AEG com 6 horas de vida aqui, amplitude mínima e máxima menores do que 5. Que padrão que é esse?
Pode ser um
É
surto-supressão
surto-supressão ou
ou padrão gravemente deprimido.
gravemente deprimido?
Gravemente deprimido, né? Aqui a gente consegue enxergar que a amplitude mínima e máxima estão menor do que 5 aqui, que provavelmente ou possivelmente a gente tem alguns artefatos, mas aqui a gente consegue ver claramente que é aquele traçado isoelétrico, né? O flat trace. Como é que é a evolução? Com 72 horas de vida. Agora sim, né? Eu tive uma evolução do traçado? Tive. Tive uma evolução do traçado para a normalidade? Não. Né? Aqui é um traçado que lembra muito, né, aquele traçado super deprimido, né, o lower margin menor aí do que 3, e com momentos aqui com surtos que ultrapassam 25 microvolts. Né? Isso daqui realmente tem momentos de surto-supressão, que é um padrão claramente patológico com 72 horas de vida, que naquele nosso estudo de revisão sistemática mostrou ser um momento importante para ter prognóstico. Qual que foi o desfecho precoce dessa criança? Ela teve alta com 6 meses de vida, a ressonância de crânio tinha lesões importantes em tálamo e núcleos da base. Para a gente evoluir rapidamente agora na nossa apresentação, a gente vai falar um pouquinho de crises epiléticas, a gente só relembra, mas será que é importante ver as crises epiléticas nessa população? Porque a gente lembra que lesão cerebral no período neonatal, muito frequentemente leva a crises. Por outro lado, crises levam a alteração de perfusão, oxigenação, demanda metabólica cerebral, que também levam à lesão cerebral. E dar medicação, ou seja, se lesão leva a crises, crises leva a lesão. E medicação inapropriada. Então, eu vou dar fenobarbital para todo mundo. Eu não monitorizo, eu dou fenobarbital para todo mundo. Pois é, né? Medicação inapropriada também pode levar à apoptose, também pode levar à lesão cerebral. Né? Então, quando a gente fala da asfixia, a gente lembra que a asfixia é a principal causa de crises convulsivas em bebês a termo, a incidência varia de 23% a 65%, e mais de 80% das crises são totalmente subclínicas. Então, quando a gente fala sobre crises convulsivas em encefalopatia hipoxisquêmica, parece que as convulsões são bastante comuns, a maioria delas é subclínica, e é importante diagnosticá-las e tratá-las prontamente. E justamente para falar sobre isso, a gente traz alguns casos clínicos para a gente observar esses bebês e observar esses traçados. Né? Aqui eu tenho um bebezinho a termo, 40 semanas, um Apgar 3, 5, 5 e 7, com uma encefalopatia moderada, né? Ali na avaliação do Sarná, iniciada a hipotermia terapêutica. E aqui aproximadamente, com 16 horas de vida, a gente encontra aqui esse padrão na criança, aquele ponto espícula-onda, ponto espícula-onda, né? A gente está com a EG mais ou menos nesse momento, mas eu queria que vocês olhassem aqui para a criança, né? E claramente a gente consegue enxergar, né, esses movimentos clônicos, esses abalos, tanto em membros inferiores quanto superiores. Isso daqui é uma crise convulsiva clínica que a gente consegue enxergar na criança e conseguiu confirmar no eletroencefalograma. Aí você vai falar, Gabriel, realmente eu vi no eletroencefalo a crise convulsiva, mas realmente só olhando para o bebê, mesmo sem o eletro, eu acho que eu teria diagnosticado isso de forma correta. Verdade. Só que lembra que a grande maioria das crises você só consegue interpretar pelo EG. Vamos ver um segundo exemplo. Aqui a gente tem um bebê a termo de 40 semanas, Apgar 0, 3, 5 e 7, encefalopatia grave, submetido à hipotermia terapêutica. E aqui está o padrão. A pergunta, vocês acham que ele está convulsionando? Sim ou não? A resposta mais inapropriada aqui é não sei, tenho que olhar o monitoramento. E quando eu olho o monitoramento, eu tenho aquele aumento súbito da amplitude mínima e máxima e aquele traçado estereotipado, uma crise que durou cerca de 10 minutos, né? Então, crises epiléticas são muito comuns, eu preciso do EG para fazer o diagnóstico preciso e mais correto. E, por fim, a última coisa que eu queria falar para vocês é se o EG pode auxiliar na indicação da hipotermia terapêutica, né? Porque a gente sabe que teve alguns clinical trials que utilizaram como critério obrigatório, outros que não utilizaram como critério obrigatório, mas eu gosto de frisar que todos os clinical trials utilizam o monitoramento cerebral no manejo dessas crianças. Mas o que isso pode ser útil? Como é que o EEG pode ser útil aqui, né, para identificar? A gente sabe, né, de novo, pelos clinical trials, protocolos preconizados, bebês com encefalopatia hipóxia isquêmica moderada ou grave precisam, né, receber hipotermia. Bebês sem encefalopatia ou encefalopatia leve não precisam receber hipotermia. Mas a pergunta, muitas vezes, são naqueles bebês borderline, né, aqueles bebês que as pessoas às vezes ficam um pouco em dúvidas entre encefalopatia leve e moderada. Alguns chamam isso de maybe babies, né? E a pergunta é, será que o EEG ele pode ser útil aqui? E talvez ele possa ser particularmente útil nessa população, no borderline, onde a gente vai avaliar a atividade elétrica de base, se ela tiver patológica, isso daqui é um sinal muito objetivo, né, de encefalopatia, provavelmente essa criança precisa da hipotermia, e aí também consegue ver crises subclínicas. Vamos ver um caso onde isso é particularmente interessante, que a gente tem um bebezinho a termo de 38 semanas, estubado na sala de parto, e o Sarná dele, né, o diagnóstico, a equipe que estava à beira-leito que fez o exame de Sarná falou que tinha encefalopatia leve, né? Falou que tinha encefalopatia leve. Então, a gente monitorizou essa criança ainda dentro das primeiras 6 horas de vida e aqui com 3 horas. E olhando esse vídeo, né, algumas pessoas falaram, Gabriel, o bebê ele está acordado, ele está alerta, a postura está ok, o tônus está um pouco ruim, mas eu acho que essa criança tem só uma encefalopatia leve. É o mesmo vídeo, é rigorosamente o mesmo vídeo, mas dessa vez percebam que enquanto a gente acha que a criança está tudo bem em encefalopatia leve, ela está tendo uma crise epilética, né? E a partir do momento que eu tenho uma crise epilética, não existe mais encefalopatia leve. Esse bebê tem pelo menos encefalopatia moderada e, adivinhe só, vai para a hipotermia terapêutica. É um bebê que, por causa do monitoramento, a gente identificou a crise e tratou, né, com a hipotermia terapêutica. Para a gente terminar, vou falar muito rapidamente da nossa experiência, como é que a gente trabalha hoje na PBSF com o monitoramento dessas crianças com asfixia, né? Hoje a gente tem um sistema de comunicação, por exemplo, aqui, né, o hospital, uma UTI, das UTIs neonatais que trabalham com a gente, que é lá, né, a UTI neonatal Nicola Albano, em Campos dos Goytacazes, no Rio de Janeiro, um bebezinho sob monitoramento, hipotermia terapêutica, a informação viaja, né, 1.200 quilômetros, chega na nossa central de monitoramento e tudo isso a gente armazena em servidores na nuvem. Quando a gente pega a população que recebeu hipotermia terapêutica da nossa corte da PBSF de 4 anos, a gente teve 735 crianças que receberam hipotermia terapêutica em mais de 70 mil horas de monitoramento em 29 hospitais, né, com mais de 11 mil interações entre equipe remota e equipe à beira-leito. E alguns dados interessantes, né? A taxa de cesárea é um pouco mais elevada, né? A gente sabe que muitos desses bebês têm complicações importantes. Curiosamente, né, a gente teve uma incidência maior do sexo masculino, 60%, e crises epiléticas, esse é um ponto importante. Todos os bebês que a gente monitorizou por asfixia, que foram para hipotermia, 35% deles convulsionaram, esse dado bate muito com a literatura. Dos bebês que convulsionaram, 79% deles, as crises foram só subclínicas e mais 5% tiveram crises clínicas, também subclínicas, né? Tá, alguns dos exemplos que a gente mostrou, mas de forma geral, 84% dessas crises, né, em algum momento tiveram crises subclínicas, e isso faz muita diferença na hora da condução desses casos. E quando que ocorre mais rapidamente ou mais comumente essas crises convulsivas? Em uma subanálise, né, dessa corte, a gente enxerga que a maioria das crises de longe acontecem dentro das primeiras 24 horas de vida, uma incidência um pouco maior na nossa corte entre 12 e 24. Ela cai, o risco cai no segundo dia, cai mais no terceiro dia e cerca de 7 a 8% das crianças convulsionam no reaquecimento, ali após 72 horas de hipotermia, né? Mas lembrando que o momento de maior risco de todos, com certeza, é o primeiro dia de vida. E quando a gente fala de uso de anticonvulsivantes nessa população, né, isso daqui também bate com a literatura, né, o fenobarbital isoladamente, que é a droga de primeira escolha, né, ele foi capaz de parar ou capaz de tratar cerca de 60% das crises convulsivas. E para a gente encerrar nossa apresentação, né, eu realmente relembro, conclusões, monitoramento cerebral contínuo permite em bebês com encefalopatia hipoxisquêmica, avaliação em tempo real da função cerebral, tem importante valor prognóstico, pode auxiliar sim na indicação da hipotermia, se eu encontrar uma atividade de base anormal, detecção de crises epiléticas subclínicas e auxilia muito na detecção da atividade epilética que é extremamente frequente nessa população. E eu agradeço a opinião de vocês, estamos abertos para a discussão. Muito obrigado, foi um prazer enorme. Bom, pessoal, quem tiver perguntas, por favor, fiquem à vontade para incluir no nosso questionário, para colocar no chat ou para abrir, propriamente dito. E eu acho que a gente poderia começar conversando. So, Kathy, can you hear me? No, there you go. I think one of the most important, and again, thank you so much for your talk. One of the most important topics that we want to address in this study that we are doing this training with all the centers to promote quality improvement in the assistance for babies with HIE. I think one of the major topics is, in first place, understanding that when we have a baby with HIE, we'll use the AEG in this baby, but this will not only be useful only for seizures. Is that correct? Do you agree with me?
Yeah, 100%. So I think we know and we understand that babies who have hypoxia have many seizures, are very high risk for seizures. But also we know the background pattern and the sleep-wake patterns are also very helpful in assessing the extent of injury and also the progress and recovery of the neurons, and helpful in pointing us towards what the long-term outcome may be for that baby.
Yeah. And you know, and Kathy, we have a common question. Many times people ask me, you know, because I know, for instance, in United States and other countries, when the baby is very severe, it's very critically ill, and you know, if he sustained the background pattern as a flat trace for over, for instance, 72 hours. Many times you do what you call direct care, right? Which is not very common here in Brazil, but people ask us all the time, you know, can I use this information, this also information to redirect care in this baby?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's one piece of information. It's not the only piece of information you would make to make such an important call with the family and to open the conversation with the family, but it's one piece. And so, especially in the face of, you know, the delivery history, the baby's exam, the AEG, the NIRS, and maybe an MRI, putting all of the pieces together, a neurology consult, I think it's one piece. It's not the only piece that you would use, but it would make you very, very worried and concerned for the baby's long-term potential. And certainly, you know, none of us have a crystal ball. None of us can predict the future, but we can provide the family with the information that we see. So it's useful, but I wouldn't use it as the only reason to redirect care, but certainly as a reason to begin a conversation about what other assessments might need to be done.
Great. I will just, Kathy, share my screen because we can use the subtitles for everyone.
Sure. This subtitles is like the most amazing thing ever.
Yes, and you know, Kathy, I may say they worked really, really well for your talk. You know, it was really, really nice.
Really? Oh, that's so good.
I think it got over 95% correct.
Wow.
Really impressive.
I try to speak slowly. You know, it's hard for me. I get too excited.
No, that's
It's
great.
very easy to hear from you.
Thank you.
You know, even the artificial intelligence from the computer likes to hear you talking.
That's true.
And so, as a next question, and many people again ask us, okay, Gabriel, I think I'm really worried about this baby with HIE. I'm really worried that he might have seizures. And I would like to ask, you know, when I do AEG, can I access the seizures earlier? And might this, you know, impacting the prognostic of this baby? And how important is to, you know, to treat these seizures very early on? And moreover, how often will I think we restarted.
Okay.
Yeah. And more often also, there are many times that I think the baby is having a seizure, but in the end of the day, it's not actually a real seizure. So how can AEG help us for these babies?
Oh my goodness, this is like 5 questions and 5 lectures in one, right? So I mean, I think the last sentence I said is something is better than nothing, right? So AEG is a tool. AEG has limits, but AEG is better than our eyes and our ability to assess seizures on our own. So I think it's always important to understand the tool and how it's best used and how it fits in our plan of care. So if I have on sensors, if I put the electrodes on in a baby who is high risk and I don't see seizures, with AEG, I can be about 80% confident that I'm probably not missing anything, right? People say AEG will give you about 80% of the seizures. So this means that there could be small seizures, seizures that are outside the field of where I'm monitoring, or very deep seizures that are probably of no consequence. Because with babies, if there are seizures and they repeat, and they generalize, those are going to be more seizures that are causing more injury. So I think that if you are using a tool and you know this might miss some, but I'm probably going to see way more, many more seizures than I would if I just left it to myself, because the studies will show, and there's a beautiful study from Ireland that showed that when we had highly trained nurses and video EEG continuously, that oftentimes we thought we saw seizures, but then the EEG didn't say there were no seizures. But when the nurses thought there were seizures, it was almost like smoke and fire. When we thought there were seizures, they may not have always lined up, but there were more likely to be seizures there. But only about 10% of the time did we match up perfectly. I see a seizure and I see seizure on EEG. So this means there are many babies having seizures that we never see, and babies we think that are seizing that are not seizing. So using the tool helps us to find that middle ground where, yes, I see a seizure, or yes, I see the EEG, and you can treat the right babies with the right dose and not over treat babies who are really not having seizures. Yeah. So I don't know if what else did you ask?
No, I think this was the main idea. And I always like to say, you know, when you're not doing brain monitoring for this baby, we are like completely blind.
Yes.
And this study from Ireland definitely shows this, you know. I always like to think it's better to flip the coin than try to guess if the baby is having a seizure.
Yeah, 100%. And I think we have to just realize that brain monitoring is just monitoring. So we have babies without cardiac issues who we monitor continuously with heart rate monitors. We have babies who are having no hypoxia that we monitor with pulse ox all day long. We would never think about having a baby in the NICU without heart rate monitor and pulse ox monitor, but brain monitor, this is okay to not have brain monitor. So I think it's one of these, it's just a shift in how we monitor babies, how we assess babies, and we use it as part of our whole picture. It's not the it's not always perfect. It's not always easy, but it's better than not looking at all.
It's more information, and
Yeah.
it adds a new piece to the puzzle, and you can better
Yes.
understand what's happening to the baby.
Well, and as your slides were showing too, you add NIRS on top of this too, right? And it becomes, the puzzle becomes much more robust and just amazing. I would say, it's, heart rate and saturation, this is 2 dimensions. You add AEG, now you're 3 dimensions. You add NIRS, now you're 4 dimensions, right? Now you can see the baby from all ways and really put the story of physiology together.
So I completely agree. I think we share the exactly same feeling.
Mm-hmm.
And Kathy, I think for one of our last questions, and this is just because this is definitely a hot topic. What about babies with mild AGI? Might AEG aid in this population? Yes or no? Maybe finding some subclinical seizures or abnormal background. What do you think for babies with mild AGI?
Yeah, I have a huge bias. So I would say yes, 100%. Again, it's more information and it's a very low risk. It's not invasive. And I mean, I guess if you use needles, you could say it's mildly invasive, but if you're using hydrogels, it's almost non-invasive. And I think that the yield is there. And we have, mutual friends in Florida who are working on this maybe baby protocol, and part of their maybe baby observation period for that first 6 hours of life includes AEEG. So I think AEEG, I would never not cool a baby. I would never choose to not cool a baby because the AEG is normal if the exam is abnormal. But I think if the AEG is abnormal, it would definitely swing me towards reconsidering my exam, reconsidering, continuing to follow that baby, and look, especially if there are subclinical seizures, which very likely the seizures would be subclinical in that early period. Would definitely qualify you for cooling. And that's substantiated by, remember, the CoolCap trial. Remember the original CoolCap trial, seizures was an indication for enrollment. So, a discontinuous pattern, any seizures on AEEG without having phenobarb on board, that would qualify a baby to be encephalopathic enough to have been entered into the CoolCap trial. So I think we do have some evidence that AEG can be helpful, maybe help to break the tie, right? My assessment here and my assessment here, and then the AEG. I think it builds the case for cooling. I would never use it to not cool a baby.
No, that's great, Kathy. And again, I completely agree with you. This is information. This is important information, and if the AEG is abnormal, you definitely should consider looking at the physical exam once again, and probably considering starting cooling for this baby.
Yeah. I mean, they're a very complicated group, and I think the work that our friends have done with Lena Shalak and with Guilherme Santana, and looking at the PRIME study with babies who are mild, who don't meet the criteria, who had some parts of abnormal exam, were not cooled, and showing 20% of them having long-term outcomes, adverse outcomes. I think it makes us want to just do a better job to do those babies right by giving them more information and really watching them so closely before we make that 6-hour decision to not cool. I think really watching them carefully and trying to give them the best chance at a good outcome.
That's fantastic. And Kathy, just to end our discussion, as you know me, I always like to ask you one last take-home message for.
Okay. So for AEEG take-home message?
Exactly.
Number 1, use it. Number 2, use it often. Number 3, use it more. Number 4, call Gabriel when you have a question. I mean, I think I would just say, don't save AEEG for the sickest baby. Make it part of your routine so that you can become familiar with normal. This makes looking at abnormal so much easier. And so I would say, get it, and use it more.
Yeah. No, I completely agree with you. And I would just emphasize that, you know, this is truly non-invasive assessment. You're having more information and some kind of information that would be impossible to reach without doing the brain monitoring. So yes, I completely agree with that.
100%.
Use it, because it's really will bring you very interesting information, non-invasive. So we have many advantages here. So Kathy, again, thank you so much. This was amazing. You know, I could talk here by hours with you, maybe 3 or 4 hours discussing on AEG. But again, I would like to thank you. This was amazing discussion, and with that, we will keep in touch.
Thank you, of course, anytime. Thanks, everybody. Bye, Daniela. Bye, everybody.
Obrigado a todos, muito obrigado para todos que participaram do treinamento. Essa sessão vai ficar gravada e a gente compartilha com todo o grupo. Muito obrigado.
Obrigada, gente. Não esquecem de preencher o formulário de presença, por favor. Obrigada.